The morning mist clung to the grounds of Kensington Palace like a shroud, obscuring the ancient oak trees that had witnessed centuries of royal drama. Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, stood at her bedroom window, her fingers pressed against the cold glass as she watched the gardeners tend to the rose bushes below. The irony wasn't lost on her. Even the flowers required constant attention to survive in this environment. Behind her, the ornate room felt suffocating despite its grandeur. The silk wallpaper, adorned with hand-painted peacocks, seemed to mock her with their brilliant plumage while she felt increasingly colorless with each passing day. The mahogany furniture, polished to perfection by invisible hands, reflected a life that appeared flawless from the outside, but felt hollow within. William had left early that morning for another engagement, another ribbon cutting, another speech about causes that once filled them both with passion. Now, his absences felt like relief rather than abandonment. The space between them had grown so gradually that neither had noticed until the chasm became too wide to bridge with polite conversation and dutiful appearances. The sound of heels clicking against marble echoed through the corridor outside her door. Catherine recognized the deliberate pace, measured, confident, territorial. Camilla was making her rounds, as she had done every morning since becoming queen consort. The older woman had a way of inserting herself into every corner of palace life, her presence both subtle and overwhelming. Catherine moved away from the window and settled into the velvet armchair where she had spent countless mornings pretending to read, while her mind wandered to places far from this gilded prison. The book in her lap, a biography of Princess Diana, remained unopened, its presence both comfort and reminder of what happened to those who dared to shine too brightly in this world. The soft knock on her door came as no surprise. It was precisely 9:30, the same time Camilla had begun her informal visits 3 months ago. What had started as friendly check-ins from a concerned stepmother-in-law had evolved into something far more calculated. "Come in," Catherine called, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. Camilla entered with her characteristic smile, warm on the surface but never quite reaching her eyes. She wore a cream-colored suit that cost more than most people earned in a year, yet she carried herself with the practiced humility of someone who understood the delicate balance of power in royal circles. "Good morning, Catherine. I hope you're feeling better today," Camilla said, settling into the opposite chair without invitation. Her tone carried the perfect blend of concern and condescension that had taken decades to perfect. "I'm quite well, thank you," Catherine replied, closing the book and placing it on the side table. She had learned that showing any sign of vulnerability to Camilla was like offering blood to a shark. "I'm so glad to hear that. Charles and I were quite worried after your episode at yesterday's charity luncheon." The pause before episode was deliberate, loaded with implication. What Camilla referred to as an episode had been Catherine's first genuine moment in months, a spontaneous laugh with a group of young mothers that had lasted perhaps 30 seconds too long for royal protocol. Catherine had felt alive in that moment, connected to real people with real struggles, far removed from the choreographed perfection of palace life. But she should have known that even authentic joy would be twisted into evidence of instability. "I was simply enjoying the conversation," Catherine said carefully. The mothers were sharing such wonderful stories about their children. "Of course, dear. Your natural warmth is one of your greatest assets." Camilla's words were honey-coated poison, though I wonder if perhaps you might benefit from a small break. "Nothing dramatic, you understand. Simply some time to recharge away from the public eye." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke. Catherine understood the subtext perfectly. This wasn't concern for her well-being. This was the beginning of her erasure. She had seen how efficiently the palace machinery could make inconvenient people disappear from public consciousness. A gradual reduction in engagements, fewer photo opportunities, and, eventually, irrelevance. "That's very thoughtful," Catherine replied. "But I have commitments to fulfill. The children's hospital visit next week, the environmental summit, they all easily handled by other members of the family," Camilla interrupted smoothly. "Sophie has expressed particular interest in your environmental work. And you know how devoted Anne is to healthcare causes." The chess pieces were already moving. Catherine could see her life's work being redistributed among women who had waited patiently for their moment to step into the spotlight she had never truly wanted but had come to understand was her only shield against complete dissolution. She thought of William, probably at this very moment charming donors at some corporate breakfast, his practiced smile hiding whatever remained of the man she had once loved. When had they stopped talking about their dreams and started only discussing their duties? When had their private conversations become as scripted as their public appearances? I appreciate your concern, Catherine said. But I think what I need is more engagement, not less. Perhaps it's time to take on additional responsibilities. The flash of irritation that crossed Camilla's features was quickly masked, but Catherine caught it. She had just made her first move in a game she was only beginning to understand. Now, Catherine, we mustn't overwhelm ourselves. The family has functioned quite smoothly for generations by understanding our individual roles. There's wisdom in tradition, don't you think? The threat was velvet-wrapped, but unmistakable. Know your place. Stay in your lane. Accept your diminished role gracefully, or face the consequences. Catherine stood, smoothing her navy dress, a choice she now realized had been unconsciously defiant. Diana's color. The People's Princess had worn navy to her most memorable engagements, projecting strength and accessibility rather than the muted pastels preferred by the established order. I should prepare for my afternoon appointments, Catherine said, moving toward her dressing room. Thank you for stopping by. Camilla rose as well, her smile never wavering. Of course. Do think about what I've said. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is step back gracefully. After Camilla left, Catherine sank onto her bed, the events of the past months finally crystallizing into clarity. The subtle criticisms of her appearance in the press. The gradual shift in William's behavior from supportive to distant. The way conversations stopped when she entered rooms. The meaningful glances exchanged between courtiers when they thought she wasn't looking. She had been naive to think her popularity with the public would protect her. If anything, it had made her a threat. The crowds that chanted her name, the children who reached for her during walkabouts, the way cameras lingered on her face during public events. All of it had marked her for elimination in the eyes of those who preferred their royalty predictable and controllable. Her phone buzzed with a text from her private secretary, photographer from Vogue, requesting to reschedule tomorrow's session. Shall I confirm the new date? Even her professional commitments were being quietly undermined. Catherine walked to her closet and pulled out the suitcase she had bought years ago for their honeymoon, a time when she still believed love could conquer institutional inertia. She placed it on the bed and stared at it for a long moment, understanding that this decision, once made, would change everything. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the Persian carpet. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of children playing in the palace gardens, probably her own, enjoying a rare moment of normalcy under the watchful eyes of their security detail. The thought of Charlotte and George stopped her cold. How could she even consider leaving when they needed her protection from the very machine that was now targeting her? But then, she thought of Diana's words, spoken in a rare moment of vulnerability during one of their few private conversations. Sometimes the only way to save your children from this life is to show them there's another way to live. Catherine's hands trembled as she opened the suitcase. Inside, she placed the few items that truly belonged to her. Photos from her university days, letters from friends who knew her before she became a duchess, the simple gold necklace her mother had given her on her 18th birthday. Everything else in this room belonged to the crown, acquired to transform Kate Middleton into the Catherine that royal life required. As evening approached, the palace settled into its familiar rhythm of quiet efficiency. Dinner would be served precisely at 7. Conversation would be pleasant but carefully neutral, and afterward, William would retreat to his study while she made excuses about feeling tired. But tonight would be different. Tonight, she would tell him about Camilla's visit and watch his reaction carefully. She would gauge whether any part of the man she had fallen in love with still existed beneath the layers of royal conditioning. His response would determine whether she walked away alone or whether there was still hope for salvaging something real from the wreckage of their carefully constructed life. The suitcase remained open on her bed, a question waiting for an answer. Outside, the gardeners had finished their work, leaving the roses pruned and proper, their wild growth tamed into acceptable shapes. Catherine wondered if she had the courage to remain untrimmed, to grow in directions that might be beautiful even if they weren't approved by those who had appointed themselves the architects of her life. William returned to Kensington Palace as darkness settled over London, his shoulders heavy with the weight of another day spent being the perfect prince. The corporate breakfast had been followed by a school visit, which led to a meeting with environmental activists, and, finally, a private dinner with potential donors for his mental health initiatives. Each event had required a different version of himself. Charming for the executives, inspiring for the children, serious for the activists, grateful for the philanthropists. As he walked through the private entrance, loosening his tie, he caught sight of his reflection in the gilded mirror that had hung in the hallway for 3 generations. The face looking back at him belonged to his father at the same age, duty-worn and carefully neutral, trained never to reveal too much of what lay beneath the surface. The butler, Henderson, appeared with practiced invisibility. "Your Royal Highness, the Duchess is waiting in the blue drawing room. Dinner has been delayed at her request." William nodded, surprised. Catherine rarely deviated from their evening routine, which had become as predictable as clockwork over the past year. They would dine together, discuss their respective schedules for the following day, and retreat to separate spaces until morning. It was civilized, efficient, and utterly devoid of the spontaneity that had once defined their relationship. He found Catherine standing by the window, still wearing the navy dress from the morning, but with her hair loosened from its formal style. The change was subtle but significant, a small rebellion against the polished perfection expected of her at all times. In her hands, she held a glass of wine, something she rarely indulged in before their evening meal. "You wanted to speak with me?" William asked, accepting the glass she offered him. The wine was from their honeymoon region in France, a detail that couldn't be accidental. "Camilla visited me this morning," Catherine said without preamble. "She's concerned about my well-being." William felt the familiar tightening in his chest that accompanied any mention of family politics. As second in line to the throne, he had learned early to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries that existed within palace walls. Camilla's growing influence since becoming queen consort had been both blessing and burden. She had brought stability to his father's life while quietly reshaping the dynamics of their family hierarchy. "What did she say?" he asked carefully. Catherine turned from the window, and William was struck by how different she looked in the evening light. Gone was the carefully composed Duchess from their public appearances. This was Kate Middleton, the woman he had fallen in love with at university, unguarded and real in a way that royal life rarely permitted. "She suggested I might benefit from stepping back from public duties. For my own well-being, of course." Catherine's tone carried a bitter edge he hadn't heard in years. "She's already identified suitable replacements for my patronages." The words hit William like a physical blow. He had suspected this conversation was coming but had hoped his stepmother would be more subtle in her approach. Camilla's talent lay in making radical changes feel like natural evolution, but this felt rushed, almost desperate. "She's probably just worried about the pressure you've been under," William said, the diplomatic response automatic. But even as he spoke, he knew how hollow it sounded. Catherine laughed, a sharp sound with no humor in it. "The pressure I've been under? William, when did you stop seeing what's happening right in front of you?" The question hung between them like a challenge. William wanted to respond with reassurance, to bridge the gap that had opened between them with the same charm he deployed at public events. But, looking at his wife, really looking at her for the first time in months, he saw something that stopped him cold. She was planning something. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said, setting down his wine glass and moving closer to her. "I'm thinking about Diana," Catherine replied. "About what she said to me once, about the difference between being royal and being real." The invocation of his mother's name changed the atmosphere in the room instantly. Diana remained a complicated presence in William's life, beloved memory and cautionary tale in equal measure. She had shown him that authenticity was possible within royal constraints, but she had also demonstrated the devastating price of challenging the system too directly. "Catherine, whatever you're considering, do you remember why you fell in love with me?" she interrupted, her voice soft but urgent. "It wasn't because I was perfect royal material. It was because I was myself. I laughed too loud at your jokes. I beat you at tennis. I told you when you were being pompous. I was real with you in a way no one else could be." William felt something crack inside his chest. She was right, of course. In their university days, Kate Middleton had been his sanctuary from the artificial world he had been born into. She had treated him like William Wales, not Prince William. She had seen past the title to the young man who just wanted to be normal, even if only for a few precious years. "That hasn't changed," he said, but they both knew it was a lie. "When did we stop talking about our dreams and start only managing our image?" Catherine asked. "When did our conversations become strategy sessions? When did we stop being William and Kate and become just functions?" The truth in her words was undeniable. Their relationship had evolved into something practical and efficient, a successful royal partnership that fulfilled its public obligations while slowly suffocating everything private and personal between them. "The responsibilities we have," William began, "are consuming us," Catherine finished. William, I can't remember the last time you told me something real about yourself. Something that wasn't related to an engagement or a cause or a family obligation. Can you? He searched his memory and came up empty. More dinners where we discussed tomorrow's engagements? More weekend getaways that turn into photo opportunities? More conversations about maintaining our public image while everything real between us dies a little more each day. Catherine moved to the fireplace, where photographs of their wedding day sat in silver frames. In those images, their joy had been unmistakable and unrehearsed. They had looked at each other with the certainty of people who believed love could conquer any obstacle. I've been living someone else's life, she said quietly. I've let them reshape me into what they needed, and I've watched you do the same thing to yourself. We're disappearing, William. The people we used to be are vanishing, and I don't think either of us has noticed because we've been so focused on being what everyone else expects. William felt panic rising in his chest. This conversation was heading somewhere irreversible, and he wasn't sure he was ready to follow her there. What are you saying? Catherine turned to face him fully, and he saw a resolve in her eyes that reminded him painfully of his mother during her final years, a woman who had decided that authentic living was worth more than comfortable dying. I'm saying that Camilla is right about one thing. I do need to step back, but not from public duties from this life, from the pretending and the performing and the slow erasure of everything I used to be. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. William felt the weight of generations of royal history pressing down on him. All the men who had chosen duty over desire, obligation over authenticity. But he also felt the pull of the woman standing before him, offering him a choice he had never imagined possible. You want to leave? He said finally. I want to remember who I am, Catherine replied. And I want you to remember who you are too. Not Prince William, not the future king, not the perfect royal son. Just William. The man who used to sneak out of palace events to get fish and chips. The man who dreamed of being a helicopter pilot not because it was a suitable royal career, but because he loved the freedom of flying. William's mind raced through the implications of what she was suggesting. The scandal, the constitutional crisis, the impact on their children, the disappointment of his father, the fury of the press, the chaos it would bring to the carefully ordered system that had shaped his entire existence. But underneath all of that, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a spark of genuine excitement at the possibility of unknown adventure. They'll never let us simply walk away, he said. They can't stop us from being ourselves, Catherine replied. They can control our titles, our duties, our public appearances. But they can't control our hearts unless we let them. She moved to a desk drawer and withdrew an envelope, placing it on the table between them. I've written a letter to your father. Not a formal statement, just an honest explanation of why we need to step back and rediscover who we are outside of these roles. William stared at the envelope as if it contained a bomb. In many ways, it did. The words inside would detonate their carefully constructed life and force them to build something new from the ruins. What about George and Charlotte? He asked. They deserve parents who know how to be authentic human beings. They deserve to see what real love looks like, not just successful royal partnership. How can we teach them to be themselves if we've forgotten how to be ourselves? The logic was unassailable, but the fear remained overwhelming. William had been trained from birth to see his role as sacred duty, to understand that personal desires were secondary to institutional needs. The idea of putting his own happiness first felt both revolutionary and terrifying. If we do this, he said slowly, there's no going back. They'll make us examples of what happens to royals who choose themselves over service. Maybe that's exactly what the world needs to see, Catherine replied. Maybe someone needs to show that it's possible to honor your heritage while still honoring yourself. She moved closer to him, close enough that he could smell the subtle perfume she had worn on their wedding day, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes that had first captivated him across a crowded lecture hall nearly 2 decades ago. I need to know that the man I fell in love with still exists somewhere inside the prince, she whispered. I need to know that William Wales isn't completely lost inside Prince William. He reached for her then, pulling her into his arms with a desperation that surprised them both. For the first time in months, they held each other not as royal partners posing for photographs, but as two people clinging to the possibility of rediscovering themselves together. What would we do? He asked against her hair. If we step back, if we leave all this behind, what kind of life would we build? I don't know, she admitted. And maybe that's the point. Maybe it's time we found out who we are when we're not trying to be perfect for everyone else. The letter sat on the table like a bridge to an unknown future. Outside, London sparkled in the darkness, full of people living ordinary, complicated, authentic lives. For the first time in years, the possibility of joining them felt less like abdication and more like coming home. The morning after their conversation, Catherine woke to find William's side of the bed empty. For a moment, panic seized her. Had he changed his mind during the night? Had the weight of duty reasserted itself while she slept? But then, she heard the sound of the shower running and found the letter gone from the table where they had left it. She dressed quickly in jeans and a simple sweater, clothes that felt foreign after months of carefully selected royal attire. When William emerged from the bathroom, she saw immediately that something fundamental had shifted in his demeanor. His movements were different, less controlled, more natural. The rigid posture he had adopted over the years of royal training seemed to have loosened overnight. "I've asked Henderson to arrange a private meeting with my father this afternoon," he said without preamble. "No courtiers, no private secretaries. Just the three of us." Catherine felt her heart race. "You're really going to give him the letter?" "We're going to give him the letter," William corrected. "Together." The word "together" carried weight that went far beyond their upcoming conversation with King Charles. It was a promise, a commitment to face whatever came next as partners rather than as separate individuals trying to manage their individual royal roles. They spent the morning with George and Charlotte, taking them for a walk in Hyde Park without the usual security escort, a small rebellion that felt enormous in its significance. Catherine watched William with their children and saw glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with emerging from beneath layers of royal conditioning. "Daddy, why are you so happy today?" Charlotte asked as William pushed her higher on the swing set, her keen 8-year-old perception cutting straight to the truth. "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups remember things that make them feel more like themselves," William replied, catching Catherine's eye over their daughter's head. George, now 10 and already showing signs of the weight he would one day carry, looked between his parents with an expression far too mature for his age. "Are we in trouble?" The question broke Catherine's heart. What kind of life had they created for their children when a moment of genuine joy from their parents triggered anxiety about consequences? "No, darling," she said, kneeling beside his swing. "Sometimes when people have been very serious for a long time, they forget how to smile. Daddy and I are just remembering how to be happy." But, even as she spoke, Catherine wondered what their decision would mean for George and Charlotte. Would stepping back from royal duties protect them from the pressures that had slowly eroded her and William's authentic selves, or would it expose them to different kinds of scrutiny and judgment? The afternoon meeting at Clarence's house felt like walking into a courtroom. Charles sat behind his desk, the letter open before him, his reading glasses perched on his nose. The man who had waited 74 years to become king looked every day of his age as he absorbed the implications of his son's words. Camilla sat in a nearby chair, her presence both expected and revealing. Catherine noticed how naturally the queen consort had positioned herself as an equal participant in what should have been a private family conversation. The territorial expansion that had begun with morning visits had now extended to the most intimate royal discussions. "I must say," Charles began slowly, removing his glasses and setting them aside, "this is not entirely unexpected." The admission surprised both William and Catherine. They had braced themselves for shock, anger, perhaps even accusations of disloyalty. They hadn't expected acknowledgement. "You've both seemed strained in recent months," Charles continued. "Though I confess I hoped it was merely a temporary adjustment to increased responsibilities." Camilla leaned forward slightly, her expression carefully sympathetic. "We've all been concerned about the pressure you've been under. Perhaps what you need is a different kind of support, not a complete withdrawal from royal life." Catherine felt the familiar manipulation in Camilla's tone, the suggestion that their problems could be solved with better management rather than fundamental change. It was the same approach that had been used to slowly erode her public role, disguised as helpful concern. "This isn't about pressure," William said firmly. "It's about authenticity, about being able to raise our children as real people rather than royal functions." Charles sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of his own compromised youth. "The monarchy requires sacrifice, William. It always has. Your grandmother understood that. I've learned to understand it. It's the price of service." "But at what cost?" Catherine spoke for the first time since entering the room. "When does service become self-erasure? When does duty become imprisonment?" The question hung in the air, and, for a moment, Catherine saw something flicker in Charles's eyes, recognition, perhaps even regret. He had given up his first love for duty, had endured decades of public scrutiny for his relationship with Camilla, had waited most of his life to fulfill the role he was born to occupy. The institution is larger than any individual, Camilla interjected smoothly. It survived for centuries because people understood their responsibility to something greater than their personal desires. Catherine turned to face her directly, abandoning the polite deference she had maintained for years. And how many people has it consumed in the process? How many authentic human beings has it transformed into acceptable royal products? The directness of the challenge clearly caught Camilla off guard. For the first time since Catherine had known her, the older woman's composure slipped slightly, revealing a flash of genuine annoyance beneath the practiced concern. I think perhaps emotions are running rather high, Camilla said, attempting to regain control of the conversation. Maybe we should continue this discussion when everyone has had time to reflect. No, William interrupted, his voice carrying an authority Catherine hadn't heard in years. We're not postponing this or allowing it to be managed away. This is our decision, and it's final. Charles studied his son carefully, perhaps seeing him clearly for the first time in years. What exactly are you proposing? We want to step back from full-time royal duties, William said. Not permanently, necessarily, but long enough to rediscover who we are outside of these roles. We want to raise our children with some sense of normal life. We want to remember what it feels like to be ourselves. And you believe this is possible while maintaining your positions in the line of succession? Charles asked. Catherine exchanged a glance with William. This was the heart of the matter. Could they find a middle path that honored their heritage while reclaiming their humanity? We're willing to explore new models, Catherine said carefully. Perhaps something similar to what other European monarchies have developed. Working royals who also maintain private careers and lives. Camilla's expression hardened. The British monarchy isn't other European monarchies. We maintain our relevance precisely because we represent continuity and dedication to service above personal interest. Mother, William said, the title feeling strange and formal in his mouth. With respect, the monarchy's relevance depends on its ability to evolve. If it becomes a system that destroys the humanity of the people within it, how long before the public decides it's no longer worth preserving? The argument was logical and devastating. Charles had spent his reign trying to modernize the monarchy, to make it more relevant to contemporary British life. But he had also inherited deeply conservative advisors who viewed any change as dangerous precedent. The children, Charles said quietly, shifting to his role as grandfather rather than king. What about George's future? His training for kingship should begin with learning how to be a complete human being, William replied immediately. How can he serve others if he's never been allowed to discover his own authentic self? Catherine watched as 3 generations of royal conditioning played out in the room. Charles torn between institutional loyalty and genuine love for his family. William struggling to assert his own vision against decades of deference. And Camilla working to preserve the system that had finally granted her the acceptance she had sought for decades. This could create a constitutional crisis, Camilla warned. The press will have a field day. The public expects continuity from the royal family, not upheaval. The public expects authenticity, Catherine countered. They want to see real people dealing with real challenges. The most popular royals have always been those who showed their humanity rather than hiding behind perfection. She thought of Diana, of the way the public had embraced her vulnerability and genuine emotion even as the palace machinery worked to control and contain her. The people had recognized something real in Diana that they hungered for in their own lives. Charles stood and walked to the window, looking out at the London street where normal people went about their normal lives. When he turned back to face them, his expression was unreadable. If you do this, he said slowly, there will be consequences. The press will be brutal. Some members of the family will see it as betrayal. The institution will survive, but your relationship with it will forever be changed. We understand that, William said. Do you? Charles asked. Do you understand that once you step outside the protection of the royal bubble, you'll be exposed to criticism and scrutiny in ways you've never experienced? Do you understand that your children will face questions about their parents' choices for the rest of their lives? The questions were fair and frightening. Catherine felt the weight of responsibility for George and Charlotte's future pressing down on her. But she also thought about the alternative, watching her children slowly lose themselves to the same system that had nearly erased her and William. We understand the risks, she said quietly. But we also understand the risk of doing nothing. Of continuing to pretend we're fine while we disappear a little more each day. Charles nodded slowly, recognizing the echo of conversations he might have had with his own father decades earlier if he had possessed the courage to voice his doubts. I need time to consider the implications, he said finally. And you need to develop a concrete plan. If you're serious about this, it can't be an emotional reaction. It needs to be a thoughtful transition that considers all stakeholders. Camilla's face had settled into a mask of polite acceptance, but Catherine caught the flash of calculation in her eyes. The queen consort was already planning her response, already considering how to minimize the damage to her own position and influence. As they prepared to leave, Charles stopped them at the door. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I envy your courage. I'm not certain I ever had it when I might have needed it most. The admission was devastating in its honesty. Here was the King of England acknowledging that he too had sacrificed authenticity for duty, that he too understood the cost of institutional loyalty. Walking back to Kensington Palace, Catherine and William moved through London like people seeing it for the first time. The city felt different when viewed as a potential home rather than a backdrop for royal duties. The anonymous faces on the street seemed less like subjects and more like neighbors. Are we doing the right thing? William asked as they passed a playground where children played without cameras recording their every move. Catherine took his hand, feeling the calluses he had developed from his helicopter training, evidence of the real person that still existed beneath his royal identity. I don't know if we're doing the right thing, she admitted. But I know we're doing the honest thing. And maybe that's where right begins. That evening, as they tucked George and Charlotte into bed, both children seemed to sense the change in their parents' energy. The forced cheer that had characterized recent bedtime routines had been replaced by something more genuine, more present. Mummy, Charlotte said as Catherine kissed her goodnight. You look different today. Different how, sweetheart? Like you used to look in the old pictures. Happy in your eyes. The observation from her 8-year-old daughter confirmed what Catherine already knew. Their children had been watching them disappear just as surely as they had been disappearing from themselves. Whatever challenges lay ahead, at least George and Charlotte would have parents who were fighting to remain real people rather than royal constructs. As London settled into darkness around them, Catherine and William began planning not just their exit strategy, but their return to life. 3 weeks later, the carefully orchestrated machinery of royal life began to show cracks. Catherine noticed it first in the subtle changes to her schedule. Previously confirmed engagements suddenly required postponement due to logistical concerns, and new invitations stopped arriving with their usual frequency. The palace was implementing what she had come to recognize as the slow fade, the gradual reduction of visibility that preceded complete irrelevance. But instead of the despair she might have felt months earlier, Catherine experienced something unexpected: relief. Each canceled engagement felt like a small liberation. Each postponed appearance another step toward reclaiming her time and energy for things that mattered beyond public relations. William, meanwhile, had thrown himself into developing their transition plan with the systematic approach he had once applied to military operations. Their evenings, previously spent in separate studies managing their individual royal responsibilities, became collaborative sessions mapping out a future that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I've been researching other models, he told Catherine one evening, spreading documents across their dining table. Prince Carl Philip of Sweden maintains royal duties while running a racing team. Princess Martha Louise of Norway stepped back to pursue her own business interests but remained in the line of succession. Catherine studied the precedents he had compiled, noting how other European royals had found ways to balance heritage with personal authenticity. The British monarchy's rigid adherence to full-time service seemed increasingly anachronistic in comparison. The key, William continued, seems to be transparency and gradual transition rather than dramatic rupture. We need to show that stepping back strengthens rather than weakens our ability to serve. Their plan was taking shape, a phased reduction in royal duties over 2 years, during which they would develop independent careers. William in environmental consulting, building on his passion for conservation, and Catherine in early childhood development, focusing on the mental health initiatives she had championed as Duchess. They would maintain their royal titles, but assume more selective responsibilities, appearing at state functions while pursuing meaningful work outside the palace system. The children featured prominently in their considerations. George and Charlotte would continue their education at their current school, but with reduced security presence and fewer official obligations. Most importantly, They would see their parents engaged in work they found personally fulfilling rather than simply dutiful. But, as their private plans solidified, the external pressure intensified. Camilla had not remained idle during the weeks since their meeting with Charles. Catherine began noticing items in the press that could only have originated from palace sources, subtle suggestions about her emotional stability, questions about her commitment to her patronages, speculation about the state of her marriage to William. The articles were masterfully crafted, never containing direct accusations but building a narrative that would justify her eventual withdrawal from public life. Close friends express concern became a frequent phrase, though Catherine knew these anonymous friends existed only in Camilla's strategic imagination. The morning she found herself described as increasingly fragile under the pressures of royal life, in 3 separate tabloids, Catherine realized the battle for public perception had begun in earnest. This wasn't just about her personal choice to step back. It was about controlling the narrative of why she was disappearing. "They're painting me as unstable," she told William over breakfast. The offending newspapers spread between them. "By the time we make our announcement, the public will think I'm having a breakdown rather than making a rational choice about my life." William's jaw tightened as he read the coverage. The unnamed sources quoted in the articles used language that sounded suspiciously familiar, phrases Camilla had employed during their private conversations, concerns she had expressed about Catherine's episodes, and need for support. "This is character assassination," he said grimly. "They're destroying your reputation before you can control your own narrative." The realization that they were not just planning their own future, but fighting for the right to define their story added urgency to their preparations. They would need to move faster than anticipated to announce their transition before the palace machinery could complete its demolition of Catherine's public image. That afternoon brought an unexpected ally. Princess and appeared at Kensington Palace unannounced, a rare breach of royal protocol that immediately signaled the seriousness of her mission. William's aunt had always been known for her direct approach and impatience with palace politics, but her sudden visit suggested she had inside knowledge of the campaign against Catherine. "I suppose you've seen today's newspapers," and said without preamble, settling into their drawing room with her characteristic no-nonsense demeanor. "We have," Catherine replied carefully, uncertain where the conversation was heading, and studied them both with sharp eyes that missed nothing. At 73, she remained formidable, her years of royal service having taught her to navigate palace intrigue with surgical precision. "Camilla's being rather clumsy about this," she observed. "In my day, we managed these things with more subtlety." The admission that there was indeed a this to manage confirmed their suspicions. Catherine felt a mixture of vindication and horror. They had been right about the orchestrated campaign, but its existence meant their enemies were more powerful and coordinated than they had imagined. "You know what she's doing?" William asked. "Of course I know. The woman's been maneuvering for influence since before you were born. She's simply reached the point where she feels secure enough to eliminate potential competition." Anne's tone was matter of fact, discussing palace politics with the same detachment she might use to analyze horse breeding strategies. "Catherine isn't competition for anything," William protested, and laughed, a sharp bark of amusement. "My dear boy, Catherine has been the most popular member of the royal family since Diana. Do you really think that popularity goes unnoticed by those who prefer to control the narrative?" The comparison to Diana sent a chill through both William and Catherine. They had been so focused on their personal desire for authenticity that they had underestimated the political implications of Catherine's public appeal. "What would you advise?" Catherine asked, recognizing that Anne's visit represented more than family concern. "Move quickly," and replied immediately. "Announce your transition on your own terms before they finish writing the story for you. And be prepared for war." The word war hung in the air like a declaration. This was no longer about personal choice or family dynamics. It had become a battle for survival within the royal system. "There are others who support what you're trying to do," and continued. "Not everyone believes the monarchy should be a prison sentence. Some of us think modernization might require exactly the kind of courage you're showing." She reached into her handbag and withdrew a thin folder. "Media contacts who aren't beholden to palace press offices. Constitutional experts who might prove helpful. Friends who remember what it was like to be young and idealistic before the system ground them down." The folder represented something precious in royal circles. Independent resources, people who owed their loyalties to principles rather than positions. "Why are you helping us?" William asked. Anne's expression softened slightly, revealing a glimpse of the young woman who had once challenged royal conventions herself. "Because I've watched too many good people disappear into their roles. Because your children deserve better than what we've accepted. If we're going to be symbols anyway, shouldn't we symbolize the possibility of authentic living rather than dutiful dying? That evening, they called their children into their private sitting room for a conversation that would change all their lives. George and Charlotte listened with the seriousness of young people who had learned early that their family's decisions carried weight beyond normal childhood experience. Are we going to stop being royal? Charlotte asked when they finished explaining their plans. No, sweetheart, Catherine replied. We're going to start being human. George, ever practical, focused on logistics. Will we still live here? Will I still go to the same school? Will people still take pictures of us? Some things will change, William said honestly. But the most important things, that we love each other, that we're a family, that we want to do good in the world, those things will stay the same. The children absorbed this information with remarkable equanimity, perhaps because they had sensed the stress and artificiality that had characterized their family life in recent months. The prospect of change, presented as a move toward greater happiness and authenticity, seemed to excite rather than frighten them. When will this happen? George asked. Soon, Catherine replied. Very soon. Outside, London continued its ancient rhythm, unaware that within the walls of Kensington Palace, a decision was being finalized that would send shockwaves through the British establishment and around the world. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge were about to discover whether love, courage, and authenticity were enough to overcome centuries of royal tradition and the formidable enemies arrayed against them. In the distance, Big Ben chimed the hour, its familiar sound marking not just the passage of time, but the approach of a moment that would define not only William and Catherine's future, but the future of the monarchy itself. The next phase of their battle was about to begin, and this time, they would be fighting not just for their own freedom, but for the right of future generations of royals to choose humanity over duty. The stakes had never been higher, and retreat was no longer an option. Tomorrow, they would begin the process of reclaiming their lives, regardless of the consequences. The morning of their announcement dawned gray and drizzling, as if London itself was holding its breath for what was to come. Catherine stood in her dressing room, choosing her outfit with the deliberate care of a general selecting armor for battle. She settled on a navy blue dress, Diana's color, paired with sapphire earrings that had belonged to William's mother. Every choice was symbolic, every detail a message. William paced their sitting room, reviewing the statement they had crafted together over sleepless nights. The words were carefully chosen to emphasize service over abandonment, evolution over rejection, love over duty. They had decided to announce their transition through a personally recorded video message, bypassing the traditional palace press machinery that had already proven itself hostile to their cause. The children are ready? Catherine asked, joining him by the window where they could see the gathering crowd of photographers and reporters who had somehow sensed that today would bring significant news. Henderson is taking them to school through the back entrance, William replied. They'll be safely away from all this until we can explain what's happening in our own words. The past week had been a whirlwind of preparation and maneuvering. True to Anne's warning, Camilla had accelerated her campaign, with increasingly pointed articles appearing daily about Catherine's struggles with royal life. The narrative was becoming entrenched. The Duchess was cracking under pressure and needed to withdraw for her own well-being. But they had also received unexpected support. Harry had called from California, offering solidarity born from his own experience of leaving royal life. The hardest part isn't the decision, he had told William. It's living with the consequences while knowing you made the right choice for your family. Even more surprising was the quiet backing from several senior courtiers who had watched the monarchy struggle with relevance among younger generations. These palace insiders understood that William and Catherine's model of selective service might actually strengthen the institution by making it more relatable and sustainable. At exactly 10 o'clock, they went live on social media platforms simultaneously, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, reaching millions of people directly without editorial interference. William spoke first, his voice steady but emotional. Catherine, and I have always believed that service to others is the most meaningful way to honor the privileges we've been given, he began. Today, we want to share our vision for how that service can evolve to meet the needs of our family and our changing world. Catherine continued seamlessly, her preparation evident in every measured word. We are not stepping away from our commitment to the people of Britain and the Commonwealth. Instead, we are stepping toward a new model of royal service that allows us to be more effective advocates for the causes we care about while also being more present for our children and authentic in our public roles. They explained their 2-year transition plan, their commitment to maintaining key patronages while developing independent careers, their intention to raise George and Charlotte with both royal heritage and normal childhood experiences. Most importantly, they emphasized that their decision came from strength, not weakness, from a desire to serve better, not to serve less. The video concluded with them sitting together on the sofa where they had first planned this moment, their hands intertwined, speaking directly to the camera with the intimacy of a personal conversation. "We know this is unconventional," William said, "but conventions must evolve to remain relevant. We believe the monarchy can be stronger when it embraces authenticity rather than hiding behind perfection. We're still the same people who fell in love with each other and, with the possibility of making a positive difference in the world," Catherine added. "We're simply choosing to do that work in a way that honors who we really are, not just who we're supposed to be." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within minutes, their video had been viewed millions of times, shared across platforms, and analyzed by every news organization in the world. The hashtag Authentic Royals began trending globally, with thousands of supporters expressing admiration for their courage. But the establishment response was swift and brutal. Within hours, unnamed palace sources were briefing journalists about the constitutional crisis created by their announcement. Questions were raised about their fitness for future royal roles, about the precedent their decision would set, about the damage to institutional stability. Camilla's reaction came through official channels, a carefully worded statement expressing disappointment at the timing of their announcement and concern for the impact on ongoing royal commitments. But Catherine caught the unofficial reaction in a photograph from that afternoon's state lunch, where Camilla was captured in conversation with a senior courtier, her expression revealing something far more complex than disappointment. The smirk that had been carefully hidden during their private conversations was now visible in unguarded moments, an expression of satisfaction at seeing a rival finally removed from the chessboard. The photograph, taken by a sharp-eyed royal correspondent, would become iconic in the days that followed, crystallizing public perception of the forces that had driven William and Catherine to their decision. The children returned from school to find their lives transformed. The photographers outside their gates had tripled in number, but inside their home, the atmosphere was lighter than it had been in months. George and Charlotte seemed to absorb their parents' relief, chattering excitedly about the messages of support they had seen on their classmates' phones. "Mrs. Peterson said you were very brave," Charlotte reported to her mother. "She said sometimes the right thing to do is also the hard thing to do." The wisdom of 8-year-olds and their teachers sometimes exceeded that of constitutional experts, Catherine reflected. The overwhelming public response had been positive, with particular support from young families who identified with the struggle to balance professional obligations with authentic parenting. That evening brought an unexpected phone call from Charles. His voice was weary but not angry, resigned rather than outraged. "Well," he said without preamble, "you've certainly given us all something to think about." "We tried to be respectful of the process," William replied carefully. "You bypassed the process entirely," Charles corrected, which was probably wise, given the alternative narrative that was being prepared. The acknowledgement that they had been right about the coordinated campaign against them provided little satisfaction. Catherine felt only sadness that palace politics had forced them to such dramatic action. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we learn whether the monarchy is strong enough to survive a little authenticity," Charles replied with something that might have been amusement. "The irony isn't lost on me that my son is doing what I never had the courage to do, putting personal truth before institutional expectations." The conversation ended with Charles's commitment to work with them on the transition details, to ensure that their new model of service could coexist with traditional royal duties. It wasn't enthusiastic support, but it wasn't exile either. Over the following weeks, as media coverage intensified and public debate raged about the future of the monarchy, William and Catherine began to experience something they had almost forgotten: the simple pleasure of being themselves in public. Their first joint appearance after the announcement was at a London children's hospital, where they arrived not in official cars with full security details, but in William's personal vehicle, walking through the front entrance like the working professionals they intended to become. The change in their demeanor was immediately apparent to those who knew them well. The careful perfection that had characterized their recent appearances was replaced by genuine warmth and spontaneity. Catherine laughed unreservedly with young patience. while William engaged in unscripted conversations with medical staff about his own training as an air ambulance pilot. The photographs from that visit would later be contrasted with images from similar events over the previous year, showing the visible transformation from dutiful performance to authentic engagement. The public response was overwhelmingly positive, with approval ratings for both William and Catherine reaching levels not seen since their wedding. But the real victory came 6 months later, when George scored his first goal in his school football match. Instead of watching from a discreet distance through security barriers, William and Catherine stood on the sidelines with other parents, cheering loudly and unselfconsciously. When George ran to them after the game, grass-stained and grinning, he hugged them without worrying about protocol or cameras. The photograph that appeared in the next day's papers showed a 10-year-old prince celebrating with his parents like any normal child, muddy knees, genuine joy, and all. The caption read simply, "Future king, present child." That image encapsulated what they had been fighting for: the right to be real people in addition to royal symbols, the possibility of serving others while also serving their own family's needs for authenticity and connection. As they drove home from the match, Charlotte asleep in her car seat, and George chattering about his goal, Catherine reached for William's hand. They had won something precious, not just the right to step back from full-time royal duties, but the right to step forward into lives that felt genuinely their own. The monarchy survived their choice, as Anne had predicted. If anything, their model of selective service and authentic engagement strengthened public connection to the royal family. Young people who had felt alienated by the formality and perfection of traditional royalty found themselves inspired by William and Catherine's commitment to being both dutiful and real. Camilla's smirk, captured in that revealing photograph, had inadvertently exposed the petty machinations that drove palace politics. Public sympathy shifted decisively toward the couple who had chosen courage over comfort, authenticity over appearance. Most importantly, George and Charlotte grew up watching their parents choose love over fear, truth over convenience, and authentic service over empty duty. They learned that royal birth was a privilege to be honored through genuine contribution to society, not a prison sentence requiring the sacrifice of one's essential self. Years later, when historians would analyze this period of royal transformation, they would mark William and Catherine's announcement as the moment the British monarchy chose to evolve rather than ossify, to embrace change rather than resist it. Their courage to be themselves had not diminished the crown. It had restored its relevance for a new generation. In choosing authenticity over perfection, they had discovered that the strongest foundation for service was not duty divorced from personal truth, but the integration of public responsibility with genuine human experience. They had learned to be royal by first learning to be real, and, in doing so, had shown the world that even the most ancient institutions could be transformed by the simple revolutionary act of telling the truth about who you are and what you need to thrive. The photograph of Camilla's smirk became a symbol of the old way of doing things, the politics of diminishment and control that they had overcome through transparency and courage. But it was ultimately overshadowed by thousands of images of William and Catherine living openly and authentically, raising their children with both heritage and humanity, and serving others from a place of genuine strength rather than dutiful performance. Their story became proof that it was possible to honor the past while creating something new, to respect tradition while writing your own chapter of truth.